screen? Yes? Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Mahogany. Okay, so usually there's one of them on there. I've heard it from a couple of times, and if you've taken the test before, maybe you've seen at least one of those. Okay, aphasia. Aphasia is ability to not the inability to understand phrases. Okay, so the 5 A's, or sometimes they're dementia. Those are the things that we lose when we have that some sort of attack neurocognitive disorder. Neurocognitive disorders, of course, remember, those are the ones that happen as our brain is fully developed. Neurodevelopmental disorders, those are the ones that happen as we're growing. Okay, thank you, Crystal. So aphasia, that's difficulty with language. Okay, so you've had a stroke, a part of your brain is damaged, and you can't understand phrases. That's how I remember it. Aphasia is phrases. Agnosia, I don't remember things, items. I can't remember the name for those items. Propagnosia starts with a P. That's the one that helps you can't remember people's faces. Okay, apraxia, and sometimes you'll see ataxia. Those are your motor skills. So I always remember I can't catch ataxia. That's so apraxia and ataxia are motor skills. Amnesia, things you can't remember. Anomnia, things that you can't have. You don't have the words for the name. You don't have the name for the. You can't find the words for the items. So usually you'll see one of those things, and they are in the APGAR book. I haven't seen them in TDC, but I have seen them in the APGAR book. So usually there's one of those that's on there. Okay. So in general tonight, we're talking about I want to talk about the agency and how to run an agency and those issues of supervision, and kind of even start from the Code of Ethics, because the Code of Ethics clearly talks about what we're supposed to do with in supervision. Okay. Just some clues, always, if you're new with me, okay? I am not a fan of the acronyms, and that's just not my style. If it works for you, do whatever works for you. I am really not saying that you shouldn't. I'm just going to tell you it's not my style. This is the method we follow. This is the problem-solving method. This is the method that you learned when you were in school, usually at your bachelor's level. Okay, your problem-solving method is, again, that's what I'm going to do. Safety first, right? Always safety, as she mentioned before. A child abuse, safety. You're going to kill me, you're going to kill somebody else, safety. That important. Okay? If it's high in feelings, if the question is high in feelings, I have to assess. I have to engage. If I turned on the camera and I'm bawling, you're upset, you're yelling at me, the first thing I'm going to say is, wow, are you okay? Let's acknowledge those feelings. In order to build rapport, I really have to acknowledge those feelings. That's the engagement part. Okay, you'll see sometimes those questions that really talk about empathy, showing empathy. A woman is in a session and her husband they're in a couple session, and the husband says he's complaining about his wife's sex life and how awful she is in bed, and she begins to cry. I'm going to acknowledge her feelings. I'm not going to ask her what she thinks. I'm just going to acknowledge the fact that she's crying. This must be really hard for you. Acknowledge those feelings. It's that important. You're going to match feelings for feelings when you see those questions. Okay, then I'm going to assess. And I always think that whether it's a first, next, or best question, if there's one more question I can ask, I'm going to assess. Always. And whether we're talking about the Code of Ethics, or we're talking about supervision, or any agency stuff, those questions are going to follow that gather more information. So this is made for the vignettes. That's what it's made for. The vignettes. You've got the family, you've got the kid, all of those things. So that's what this planning method was based on, working with those families. However, when it comes to any other question, whether it's an agency question or a Code of Ethics question, I'm still going to gather as much information that I can. We're still going to ask any questions before I intervene. Okay? So, and that's kind of a rule for all tests. If you see, what should I do first? First, if it's not safety and I'm not crying, is there any way I can gather more information? If there's nothing I can gather, then I'm going to go down the next step. And again, not a huge fan of all of those, just not. Remember, planning, you're going to plan with the client, not for the client, with the client. and you'll see very few intervention questions on the test. Most of them are way before that. And then if it's a purely intervention question, then you're going to follow this. You're going to make sure that you rule out. Go to the top and tell me what matches. And what she was talking about is prove it in the question. So that's what I always say. So when you have a question, most often it is so easy to rule out the two that don't belong, right? And then I've got two that do belong, and I'm trying to figure out between those two, how do I know? How do I know? So two choices. Compare the two to each other. Okay, what makes one better, different, or worse than the other? And then go back to the question. What can I prove in the question? What words to me how do I know this is the answer? There's a question that talks about a subpoena and a court order, right? So I do know that if I get a subpoena or an order from the court, remember subpoena is my voice, court order is that paperwork. If I get one of those from the court, I'm showing up, right? I am showing up because I don't do jail. I'm sorry, showing up. Of course, I'm going to protect the client at all costs because the client is the priority. However, that same question, if it starts off with, I work for a social work agency, I'm going up the chain of command, right? I'm going to take it to my supervisor. I'm going to take it to the legal counsel, somebody, because I work for an agency. So those small words change the whole question. So go back to the question and prove it. Okay, so that's really kind of my method of teaching. Content is important. I cannot pretend that content is not important. However, how you answer the questions is the key to passing this test. Taking that content and then looking at those questions and learning how to answer questions. If you have no clue whatsoever, none, you can't word match, you have no idea, really, literally look in the question to see if you see the same word. You see a synonym of the same word. If that's your only choice, that's a better guess than taking a blank guess. Okay. One of the things that we do, especially people that English is not their first language, and you're really looking at how to pass a test, you're just really going to word match sometimes. So if you have no idea that's your last case scenario, then word match. Okay. Huge fan of flagging questions, but make sure you save yourself enough time. Don't spend more than a minute and a half on a question, but read it. Read it, go back in the question and prove it. Okay. So that's the method I teach. That's what you learned in social work school. I didn't make it up. That's just what you were taught. We were taught that for a reason, and that's how we work those problems. One of the other things that she mentioned is a crisis intervention method. That's the other one that we need to follow. Again, it is in both TDC and APGAR. Just making sure that you understand what that is and what that looks like. Okay, so the assumption is in a crisis intervention that I will never see the people again. Okay, I am there to get this crisis, get them through this crisis, and I will never see them again. That is always going to be the assumption. Put it up for you guys. And as I go along, please feel free to ask any questions. I do realize that I talk really, really fast. I'm just trying to get as much in as I can get in this hour and a half. And you can go back and watch the video 1,000 times if you so choose, but I want to get as much information in as I can. If it's your first time with me, the first part of the test, the first part of class, I just give you information. The second part, we're going to ask and answer some questions. Okay, so this is Robert's crisis intervention model. It doesn't look this way in the text. However, this is the way that I like it. It just doesn't look this way in the text. I'm muting somebody. Thank you. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to do is we know that in the crisis, I'm not going to be with that person forever, right? Probably never see them again. What is the goal of crisis intervention? To return them to their prior state of functioning. And the question will say, this is a crisis. You're using crisis intervention stages. It'll give you those words. That's how I know to use this model, because it'll tell me. Okay, so about 20 minutes, I will never see them again. That is the assumption. We're done. Am I looking at their childhood stuff? No, don't have time for that. Okay, so the code of ethics says we are supposed to be there in times of crisis, whether it's really about a nation crisis, if something happens in my community, all that stuff, we're supposed to be there. So crisis happens, there's a school shooting, there is a, this occurred after 9/11. There's a suicide in a school and they've called in the crisis team. All of those things are when you would use this method. But the question will say, using the crisis method, in a crisis, what do you do? First thing I'm going to do is plan and conduct my psychosocial assessment. That is not getting out a whole sheet of paper and going down and going over like, what's your name? What age were you born? No, no, no. Are you okay? Are you physically okay? Let's get to some place that I know we're safe. Let me just make sure you're okay. So, establish rapport quickly. I'm going to say, hi, I am Dr. Pam, and I'm part of the crisis team. We're going to get you out. We're going to get you guys out. We're good. So I'm going to re-encourage them, be there. If you remember your own life being in a crisis, sometimes you're in shock. You're like, you can't, the simplest things, you just can't figure out what to do. The third thing I'm going to do is gather as much information as I can. What did you see? What did you hear before the shooting? How did you feel before this happened? I'm sorry, not how do you feel. What do you recall? Okay, I'm trying to stay away from the feelings questions until 4. But 3, I'm gathering as much information as I can. And the assumption of this model is that everyone uses the same model. So it's the policeman, the fireman, the psychologist, the counselor, whoever it is, they're using the same approach. So step 4 is when I'm going to let those feelings come down. I'm going to say, so how are you handling this? Okay, I'm just trying to gather as much as I can and before I ask those questions, because we know what happens when you ask me my feelings, right? Yes, I'm a blubbering mess. And maybe it's just me, but most people, once I can get through that first part, but once you ask me and it's okay to let my guard down, I'm going to lose it. Okay, step 5, you're looking for your untapped resources. Again, that's information that you had before. How did you get through this before? What did you do? I'm going to develop an action plan, and then I'm going to follow up with a plan and agreement. Again, the assumption is I will never see them again. I don't care what happened with their childhood. The only goal is to return them to their prior state of functioning. That is the only plan. Okay? So those are 2 methods that are just important to understand when it comes to learning how to follow the steps. Okay, but I'm going to go back to my code of ethics, and we're going to talk about just, first of all, you need to make sure that you have read the code of ethics. Read them, read them, read them. There are questions in here that are verbatim from the code of ethics. Okay, you can read a description of them someplace else, but you need to know what the code of ethics say. Okay, it'll talk about the, go back up. Okay. Let me in. There we go. Okay. So my principles, you've got to know those. Service, social justice, dignity and worth of a person, importance of human relationships, integrity, and competence. Those are our principles. That's what we live and die by. Okay? So then I'm going to make sure I really understand those. Social justice is making sure that it's fair for everyone. I've had a couple of conversations this week with my clients, people that I tutor, of just the disparity now with education and COVID. So kids who have to go back to school because they need food to eat, as opposed to kids whose parents can, hire a teacher to come in and teach the kids or teach a group of kids. I think that personally, again, so whenever this ends, I just think that's where we're going to see long-term effects is this schooling. Schooling was most often the equalizer, that kids who didn't come from the best families really could kind of, get an education. And I truly think that's going to change things. Okay, so those are my code of ethics. Those are the standards I really want to make sure that I understand. Okay, so when it comes to code of ethics, we're talking about supervision and outrun an agency today. Okay, the assumption is you are the best social worker ever. Just remember that, whether it's whether you feel it or not. The answer is that you really, really are just the best social work ever. Okay. So I'm making sure that when I read this, it's not, I know this. I don't refer out because I'm the best. There's no such thing as someone who's more experienced than me. I'm the best. And the assumption is at some point you'll all be supervisors. Whether you're running your own agency or somebody else's agency, you'll be in charge. So that's why it's important to know the supervision rules and to really know going to the test that you are good at what you do. So in general, when do I go to my supervisor?
When I'm having counter-transference concerns issues.
And you're correct. Keep going. And
Personal issues in life.
So counter-transference as well as transference. Okay.
Oh,
Any
oh, okay. I
feelings
didn't know
that
that.
get in the way of, any feelings. I love him. He loves me. I can't stand him. He loves me. I mean, he can't stand me. Anything that comes in the way of the relationship. What it could be. I'm going through divorce. And my client right now is going through a divorce. And I'm worried. I don't like him because of what I've gone through. Okay. Things like that. Those are what I go to my supervisor or I'm going to seek consultation for. Okay. So any feelings, you're right, any feelings that get in the way with the social, things that get in the way. Okay. So depending on, so if you, in general, I think no matter where you are in your career wise, you should always seek consultation if feelings get in the way. If you find a client that you really, really like or really, really don't like, not just for the test, in the real world, you need to see some supervision because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees and you can't go on like not liking this client. We're going to use a strengths perspective and try very hard to find out what's going on, but I just can't do that. I can't get rid of the client because I don't like him. I can't get rid of the client because he's attracted to me. Those aren't options. This is a therapeutic relationship, and whatever feelings get in the way, I don't get to just say, oh, by the way, I'm done with you. It gets abandonment. We can't do that. So the few times I'm going to go to the supervisor is if there's something in the therapeutic relationship that's getting in the way, right? So remember that though, if it's a first question, a client says, oh my gosh, you're amazing. I love you. If it's a first question, what am I going to do? Come on, be brave. If it's a first question, I'm just going to ask him. Gather more information. What does that mean to you? That's all. Exactly. Assess. What does that mean? Okay. If the question says it's been 3 weeks since we've been doing this, and I'm not really sure, I've told him several times and he still keeps coming on to me, then I'm going to the supervisor. Right. But at first, I'm going to assess. Now, if my feelings are first and I come in and it's a child abuse case and he's telling me this horrible story and I can't stand this man. I can't stand him for what he did. Then I'm going to go straight to for supervision. Okay. Or consultation. Consultation is paid supervision. So if you're not working in an agency, sometimes you have to pay for consultation, but that's when you go to your supervisor. The only other times you get to go is if you are new or young. So it'll say a newly graduated. I don't mean young age. I mean fresh in school still, right? So if it says a new social worker, blah blah blah, then I get to seek it. If it says I'm an intern, I get to go for supervision. I get to ask. But other than that, I am the best social worker in the world, and I can figure it out. Okay. Getting rid of the client is not is not an issue. That's not going to happen if it's my issues. That is just not okay. Okay. Somebody said coworkers. No, the code of ethics says if I'm having an issue with coworkers, then what I do, I go to the coworker first, right? Okay. And it really is not about trying to get him in trouble. It's really about trying to help him. Hey, Bob, I've noticed that, you've been coming in smelling like alcohol a couple of days, right? Okay. I'm going to go to him first. And most often, the question then, if you see one that says what to do next on that one, if I already talked to him, then it's usually reported to the board. Okay, because if he's got a license and you've discussed it with him and as he's doing something unethical and it's continuing to happen, that's a go to the board question, not go to my supervisor. Okay, because I don't want him to just get fired and then go work someplace else. Because the issue is what he's doing is not okay. So I want to make sure that the board knows, and we've already discussed it. Okay. Other than that, you really don't go. You don't go. There's always that question about I live in a rural setting, right? And my rule always is I can't refer you out unless I've seen you naked. Okay? Or I refer you out the minute I've seen you naked. So an ex, a cousin, somebody down the road, somebody that I might have seen naked because we grew up in the same house, the same neighborhood, makes it easy. I can't see you. I can't see you. An ex-spouse, but Bab, you're the best therapist and you know me so well. No, 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 no. Do not see that person, okay? Refer those people out immediately. And that not only for the test, but for the real world. No. Okay? There's a question that says you get halfway through the assessment and you realize that you are cousins or related to that person. Okay? You're not going to continue that assessment, right? Okay? You're going to, politely say, hey, you know what? I'm going to have to refer you out, blah, blah, blah. We're related, whatever. I cannot do that. I've got to avoid that at all costs. Also, my supervisor is not there to be my therapist, right? Nope.
Hey Doc, can you
Yeah.
explain the young lady, the first one who passed, she stated that the question was something similar to what you're speaking about now, where she was volunteering with someone and then come to find out that they were going to start sessions at the same agency.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't they just talk about it and see if it's fine? I mean, they didn't have a intimate relationship. Why is that? Why would we refer out on that case?
And she didn't give us the whole question. My assumption is it wasn't just a one-time volunteer event. So I would need to believe this was kind of an ongoing thing, maybe. Okay, and then I need to avoid dual relationships. So if I'm your friend, I can't be your friend and your therapist, right? I can't be your therapist and then come back and be your friend. So I can only have one relationship with you. So if we're on this volunteer team together, then I need to say, hey, I can't see you as my therapist. Or I can't be your therapist.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no dual relationships. Sometimes they're unavoidable. You'll see that on the test. It talks in general if they're unavoidable. And what you want to do is just kind of go back to the client and talk about, you're in a small rural area and there's issue with a church, right? You're in the same church. Do everything you can to make sure that you stay you're not in the same committees, you're not in the same Sunday school lesson, things like that. Okay? Okay, so just again, some rules of supervision. This is the one on unethical conduct. Okay, I have a colleague. Social workers should take adequate measures to discuss, prevent, expose, and correct the unethical conduct of colleagues. Okay, so I've got to be familiar with the laws and I need to make sure that I do with my client. Wait a minute, that's not okay. Okay, so when necessary, social workers who believe the colleague has acted unethically should take action through appropriate formal channels, such as the state licensure board, regulatory body, the ethics committee, or other professional ethics committees. It doesn't say go to my supervisor. If I've gone to him first and this isn't working out, then I need to report him to the board because I don't want him having a license or her having a license. Okay. Okay. So again, my supervisory role, social worker who provides supervision or consultation. Most often, if it's an agency question, you're not providing consultation. Consultation is not free. Okay, a supervision is something you get in an agency many times because you work for the agency, but it would not be free for me to give you for me to consult with you. Okay, I would charge you. So, however, if you're working in a private practice, then many times you do have someone that you consult with and you pay them. That's just part of it. Okay, so whether in person or remotely, they should have necessary knowledge and skills to supervise or consult appropriately within only their areas of knowledge and competence. Okay, so one of those questions again goes back to you're in a rural area and the assumption in rural areas you're the only one, right? So you get a client who has bulimia and you have never treated bulimia or you've treated it a little bit and you just really don't know. What do you do with that?
Go seek an expert.
I do. You got it. And the expert does not have to be a former social worker. So sometimes it'll say, reach out to a colleague. No, if my colleague doesn't have any more experience, and it says it in the question, my colleague doesn't have any more experience than I do in this field, then no, I need an expert. Would that be the lawyer down the street, or a criminal justice guy, or a psychologist, whoever it is. They do not have to be in my profession, but I really need to seek consultation. And I can't refer them out. If it ever says in a rural area, I cannot refer them out. The assumption is there's no one there but me. Okay. Here's another question. Okay. Again, education and training. If you're a function educator, make sure that you are trained. Somewhere it says, I can't sleep with my students either. I know. Social workers who function as educators or field instructors for students should not engage in any dual or multiple relationships with students when there is a risk of exploitation or potential harm to my student. Dual relationships may arise when using social network sites or electronic media. Not only can you not friend your clients on Facebook, you shouldn't be friending your students and people that you have power over. Okay, so code of ethics, that's for the test. I'm sure many of you are friends with your supervisor, or you're the supervisor and you're friends with your subordinates. I'm going to tell you for the test, code of ethics is no, 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 no. The educator and the field instructor are responsible for setting clear and appropriate and culturally sensitive boundaries. That is your job as a supervisor to take care of that. Okay. Performance evaluations, of course, you'll see a question about how, what's one of the first things you should do when you're being evaluated for your performance, or you're getting a year-end, some kind of, process of how you're doing your evaluation at the end of the year. The question is going to say something about making sure that you know what you're being evaluated on. Remember, with all goals and objectives, they have to be measurable. And also, when it comes to me, me being evaluated, it's not fair at the end of the semester or the end of the year. You say, "Oh, by the way, Pam, this is what it's based on." Like, hello, I didn't know that. So, in order for it to be a good evaluation based on my performance, an employee evaluation, I really have to make sure that I had some knowledge, some input on how I was being measured. Okay. Client rights, we know that one. Billing, we know that one. Client transfer. Cannot unless I'm doing what? If I'm leaving the area, do I transfer the client then?
Yes.
And I just call up and say, hey, by the way, I'm leaving?
No.
How does it work?
You help the client, like if you're at an agency that has other available social workers, you will help to facilitate that process so the client is not without any services.
You got it. You got it. So I'm not going to find him necessarily another provider. If there's someone in my agency, then I'm going to say, yes, here are other people in my agency you can see. If it's outside of that, I'm going to then, I have to give them, I'm going to give a couple names. Okay, I'm going to say, here's who I referred you to. This is where your records will be, anything like that. But yes, the first thing I do, that first question on that one, it's always going to be, make sure you have someone to refer them to. Right? So you found out that your mother's sick and you're going to be gone for an indefinite period of time. What's the first thing you should do? Find some providers, right? What's to send you a list and say, well, I'm not really sure who's going to take care of you, but no, I've got to find a list of providers. I've got to find a backup plan before I say anything to my clients. Okay. So when an individual who's receiving services from another agency or colleague contacts a social worker for services, the social worker should carefully consider the client's needs before agreeing to provide services. To minimize possible confusion and conflict, social workers should discuss with potential clients the nature of the current relationship with other providers and the implications, including possible benefits or risk, or entering into a relationship with a new service provider. Many times you'll see that question that says, a client has 2 therapists and they are getting better. What is that based on? Does having 2 therapists like speed up my therapy?
No.
What's the answer then? Why am I getting better? Because
My
they're
commitment
talking.
level?
They're talking.
I'll talk, yeah.
They're talking to each other. That's always the key. Okay, because I've signed a release and my therapists are talking. Okay. So you can have two. You can have two, and yes, they're collaborating. But yeah, you sure can have two clients. You can have two therapists. That's on you. But the key is for it to be successful is they have to be working from the same theoretical orientation. If one is a behaviorist and he only cares about your behavior and doesn't care about your feelings, hello, then the other one is a Roger and only cares about my feelings. That's not going to work. So they have to be working on the same place, and they have to be working together. That is the answer to that question. You are correct.
Also,
Okay.
Ms. Kim, aren't
Yes.
you to transfer if like something's out of your scope too, right?
Most often, the ones that'll say out of your scope are going to say in a rural area.
Okay.
Okay. So if it doesn't say in a rural area, then you're not going to transfer out of your scope. It'll say expert refer to a more experienced therapist. No, that is not right. Okay. Would that be the same for a therapist and a substance abuse provider? That would not be correct, because the assumption is that most social workers are not substance abuse providers. Okay. So that was my dissertation on the lack of substance abuse social workers who have a lack of knowledge in substance abuse counseling. So no, the assumption is they're different. Okay. And if you have a client if you see that dual diagnosis on there, the assumption is they have both a substance abuse issue and a mental health issue, and they're treated at the same time. We're not treating the substance abuse one first, not doing that. Now, if it comes in and says the client is drinking out of control, has all these drinking issues, then we would refer out, right? In my mind, though, that's an assessment piece. So if a client comes in and he's drunk and he can't talk to me, if he's reports that he's been drinking for whatever years, my assessment needs to be done by a substance abuse provider, because for the test, that's not my field of expertise. The same with medication. So if someone comes in and they're having physical symptoms, they're walking with a limp, there's something going on, their medication isn't working for them. To me, again, that assessment needs to be done by a doctor. I missed that day in social work school where we discussed medical stuff. So but yes, so you're correct about that. We don't treat, but in my mind, those are assessment issues. Okay. One of the other questions while I'm talking about assessment issues, the one that talks about sometimes when it comes to those testing questions, as one that mentioned before, if it says there's a question about a child who is highly functional, very bright, but making bad grades. They're smart, but don't turn their homework in. Those are signs of some cognitive disorders. There's something wrong with processing sometimes. So when I see those questions, I am going to then recommend they get a psychological evaluation. That's pretty much the only time that's the right answer, when I think there is some processing differences, some difficulty, when his performance doesn't match his grades, when his ability doesn't match his performance. That's when I'm going to do a psychological evaluation. That's pretty much the only time. And in my mind, that is not a intervention, that's an assess. Because when I see that, that means, okay, something's not right here. We need to figure out what is wrong cognitively with this client. When it comes to a medication issue, that's a psychiatrist. But my psychologists are only going to do testing. Okay, and again, so if you recommend, you refer, that needs to make sure that you're looking at some sort of processing difficulty. Okay. In general, social workers should advocate for resource allocation procedures that are open and fair. When not all the client's needs can be met, the allocation procedure should be developed in a non-discriminatory and based on appropriately and consistently applied resources. So this is one of those like social justice issue things. So if I'm an administrator and we only have so many services to provide, then I have to make sure that I provide a services that is based on fair equality. How do I distribute these services? Okay. So commitment to your employer, I always think that's fun. You have to get CEUs. I don't ever see that on the test, but you all know you have to get CEUs to maintain your licensure, right? States are different, so you won't find a question on the number because every state is different when it comes to those requirements of CEUs. Okay. Commitment to employers. So social workers should adhere to the commitment made to employers and employee organizations, right? I got to follow the rules of the agency. However, if I think the agency is doing something unethical, what do I do?
You have to address it
I was going
in
to
some shape or form.
use the ethical model.
Ah, the ethical decision-making model, was that was?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the ethical decision-making model, remember, does not talk about, we don't ever go to the supervisor there either. If I have to make an ethical decision, I'm going to, I'm going to assess the problem, looking to see if it's actually an ethical decision, and then I'm going to go back and forth to see how we figure out what I should do based on what I've known. But again, I'm not seeking supervision. That's never the correct answer. That used to be the case up until about 2010-ish. It always said seek supervision. We do not seek supervision if there's an ethical process, just so you know that for the test. Okay, so let's go look at that. So let's see here. B, social workers should not allow an employee organization's policies, procedures, regulations, or administrative orders to interfere with their ethical practice of social work. Social work should take reasonable steps to ensure that their employing organizations' practices are consistent with the NASW Code of Ethics. If I'm working with an agency and they're doing something not appropriate, not only do I need to leave, but I need to make sure that I report it. That is not okay. Because when it comes to unethical, I want to make sure no one else gets hurt either, right? Not just me, but all the future clients that may come in. This is not okay. Okay. So, B, social workers should act to prevent and eliminate discrimination in employing organization work assignments. Okay, there's a question many times that you're seeing the policies and the way you see it is you believe that the agency is being unfair when it comes to handling policies or distributing cases. Maybe you see some bias in there. What's the first thing you should do? Ask, assess, right? Gather more information. Don't intervene until I know all the information. I'm going to ask. I'm going to read their policies. I'm going to go gather as much information as I can before I make an assessment. Okay? I'm sorry, before I make a judgment. I don't know. I don't know. Your screen is black. Is anybody else's screen black? Yes, no?
No, I can see you.
Okay. Okay. I'll refresh the screen if that helps, whoever's screen is black. Okay, I'll refresh that. Did that help? Okay, okay. So then, and I'm in the NASW Code of Conduct. If you can't see, I'm just in the Code of Ethics. I do apologize, but I am. Okay, good. Okay, so labor, make sure I got all those. Okay, so labor management disputes. Can I pick it? If my office pickets, can I?
Yes.
Ah, look at that. A, the social workers may engage in organized action, including the formation of and the participation in labor unions to improve services, clients, and working conditions. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. As long as it doesn't hurt my client, yes, I can. And that is my duty, right? My goal is to make sure that I protect my client. And if by having better working conditions is what we need to do in order for me to protect my client, that is okay. Okay. So then the actions, advocacy, you got it. I'm going to fight. It's more probably even social justice, because if I'm picketing, I think there's probably a bigger picture going on, right? B, the actions of social workers who are involved in labor management disputes, job actions, or labor strikes should be guided by the professional values, the ethical principles, ethical standards. Reasonable differences of opinion exist among social workers concerning the primary obligation as a professional during an actual or threatened labor strike. Social workers should carefully examine the issues and their possible impact on their clients. So remember that what it says is I need to make sure that if I choose to strike, if I choose to be part of this, it doesn't negatively impact my client. So basically, I need to go to my client and say, hey, you know, this is what's going on in the agency, especially if you work in a hospital or a school system, a big agency, right? They're striking. So I need to go to my client and say, hey, wait a minute. You know, my agency's going on strike. Is that okay with you? Okay. So that's where that comes from. Okay. So my competence, of course, you know that one. We talked about impairment, right? Make sure that you go to that person, and we're not talking about just ratting them out. We're just trying to talk about really helping them. Okay. We'll do something else. You're supposed to do research. No one ever does, but you do. You're supposed to. Okay. Broader society. So this is I guess at the bottom of the code of ethics no one ever gets to. But in general, so public participation. If there's a crisis or something going on, that's where my pro bono comes in. It's not in giving free services. Pro bono is if there's you know, COVID hits and I've got all these kids in crisis, and I go and I show up and I offer a class on bullying, I offer a class on self-esteem, all of those things. That's where my pro bono comes from, not with seeing clients for free. Okay, so the code of ethics does not say that. If you see the question where it talks about they don't have insurance and you're not sure what to do, as long as I follow those steps, I've offered them a reduced price. They've agreed to that reduced price. If they don't want to, then they need to just, sorry, I'm not, my goal is not. So that whole bleeding heart, poor social worker stuff, nope, that is not what the code of ethics says. Okay, public emergencies, if there's anything going on, we're supposed to be there. And political action, again, we're supposed to fight. We're advocates. This is that whole macro social work, that community social work of what we do. We fight for the underdog. Okay, the people who don't have the power, the people who don't have the money, that's what we do. Okay. Social workers should engage in social and political action that seeks to ensure all people have equal access to resources, employment services, and opportunities that meet the basic human needs to develop fully. Social workers should be aware of the impact of the political arena on practice and should advocate for changes in policy and legislation to improve conditions in order to meet basic human needs. Okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. So that macro picture, that part of running an organization, all those things that I need to do are about the big picture of social work. Okay. Okay, normally I do questions, and I'm sorry I'm out of time. However, I will post questions in the box. I will post them with the answers. I'm going to start